Good morning and welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Society of Albany. We especially welcome visitors to our service. My name is Meredith Andrews and I'm the service associate today. This morning, we welcome to our pulpit Dave Weissbard, who presented his first sermon here as president of the church youth group in 1958. He went to St. Lawrence University. He went to St. Lawrence University and the theological school there. He served UU congregations in Bedford, Massachusetts, Fairfax, Virginia, and Rockford, Illinois. Since retiring in 2006, he has preached monthly at Universalist congregations in Central Square in Watertown, New York. He is my father and father to my sisters, Lisa, Shelley, and Hillary.
Good morning. I would like to vary the call to celebration slightly and do it as a responsive reading, which is the way it appears in our hymnal as number 464. These words are from Judy Chicago. 464. And then all that has divided us will merge. And then softness will come to a world that is harsh and unkind. And then both men, women and men will be strong. And then no person will be subject to another. And then all will be rich and free and varied.
And then the greed of some, it raised the needs of many.
And then all will share equally in the earth's abundance.
And then all will care for the sick and the weak and the old.
And then all will nourish the young.
And then all will cherish life's creatures.
And then all will live in harmony with each other and with the earth.
And then everywhere will be called Eden once again.
Good morning. Before we begin our prelude, sorry, I'm over here. Hi. I hurt my back on Monday, which is why I'm seated. Which is why today Lois Bailey is going to help me with the piano. And I'll be up front with the choirs singing the hymns with you. So this morning before we listen to this tune, I want to give you a little bit of reason why I chose it as our prelude. As we set up for today's Lesser Vessel, I thought about a song that was strong, that had words that meant a lot. But that was also like its core essence, which is really interesting, is that it was written by two men who were tired of hearing music for women that was all about my man left me. I love my man, whatever my man, all the men. David White and John Madara. The other piece that I found really interesting is that it was produced by Quincy Jones. Now, most of you should know who Quincy Jones is, right? Well, in 2017, another singer produced this song. Another singer did it. And guess who produced it? Quincy Jones. So this song, when I was reading a little bit more into it, John Madara talked about his history and his life and how he lived in a diverse area of Philadelphia. And he was just so, I don't want to use the word touched, because that's not the right word, hurt by how people were treated, just like today, how we are still continuing to fight this fight for how people are treated. And Leslie Gore herself actually said that when she heard this song, she didn't hear it through the lens of a female, but as a person Why are people being treated incorrectly in ways that are unacceptable? So as we listen to this song this morning, please, I would love for you to frame this from that space. You Don't Own Me, sung by Leslie Gore.
Please join in the chalice lighting words shown on the screen. Welcoming all free seekers of truth and meaning, we gather to excite the human spirit, to inspire its growth and development, to respond morally and ethically to a troubled world, and to sustain a vital and nurturing religious community. For our wisdom story today, we have one of my favorites by an author. Oh, sorry, jumping ahead. Favorite story you want to get to?
This morning we're singing 347, Gathered Here, by a very well-known UU composer, Jim Scott, who I had the pleasure of meeting him at the conference last year in July. It was wonderful. If you can rise as you are able, please sing this one loud and proud.
Let's see what happens. I'll follow whatever. Gather the spirit, harvest the powers, the separate fires will kindle one flame. Witness the mystery of this hour, our boils this light appear all the same. Gather in peace, gather in thanks, gather in sympathy now and then.
Now we will do the wisdom story. So this is an author that my students study in class, Robert Munch, The Paper Bag Princess. Elizabeth was a beautiful princess. She lived in a castle and had expensive princess clothes. She was going to marry a princess named Ronald. Unfortunately, a dragon smashed her castle, burned all her clothes and his fiery breath, and carried off Prince Ronald. Elizabeth decided to chase the dragon and get Ronald back. She looked everywhere for something to wear, but the only thing she could find that was not burnt was a paper bag. So she put on the paper bag and followed the dragon. He was easy to follow because he left a trail of burnt forests and horses' bones. Finally, Elizabeth came to a cave with a large door that had a huge knocker on it. She took hold of the knocker and banged on the door. The dragon stuck his nose out of the door and said, "Well, a princess. I love to eat princesses, but I have already eaten a whole castle today. I am a very busy dragon. Come back tomorrow." He slammed the door so fast, Elizabeth almost got her nose caught. Elizabeth grabbed the knocker again and banged on the door. The dragon stuck his nose out of the door and said, "Go away. I love to eat princesses, but I've already eaten a whole castle today. I'm a very busy dragon. Come back tomorrow." "Wait," shouted Elizabeth. "Is it true that you are the smartest and fiercest dragon in the whole world?" "Yes," said the dragon. "Is it true," said Elizabeth, "that you can burn up 10 forests with your fiery breath?" "Oh, yes," said the dragon. And he took a huge, deep breath and breathed out so much fire that he burned up 50 forests. "Fantastic," said Elizabeth. And the dragon took another huge breath and breathed out so much fire that he burnt up 100 forests. "Magnificent," said Elizabeth. And the dragon took another huge breath, but this time nothing came out. The dragon didn't even have enough fire left to cook a meatball. Elizabeth said, "Dragon, is it true that you can fly around the world in just 10 seconds?" "Why, yes," said the dragon, and jumped up and flew all the way around the world in just 10 seconds. He was very tired when he got back, but Elizabeth shouted, "Fantastic, do it again." So the dragon jumped up and flew around the whole world in just 20 seconds. When he got back, he was so tired to talk. He lay down and went straight to sleep. Elizabeth whispered ever so softly, "Hey, dragon." The dragon didn't move at all. She lifted up the dragon's ears and put her head right inside. She shouted as loud as she could, "Hey, dragon!" The dragon was so tired, he didn't even move. She shouted as loud as she could, "Hey, dragon!" The dragon still didn't move. Elizabeth walked right over the dragon and opened up the door to the cave. There was Prince Ronald. He looked at her and said, "Elizabeth, you are a mess. You smell like ashes. Your hair is all tangled, and you are wearing a dirty old paper bag. Come back when you are dressed like a real princess." "Ronald," said Elizabeth, "your clothes are really pretty, and your hair is very neat. You look like a real prince, but you are a jerk." They didn't get married after all. And that is our story today. It is now time for us to sing out our children, youth, and volunteers as they head to their Sunday morning classes. If you don't know where your class is, please see Elizabeth in the hallway.
Our reading is from an essay that Margaret Atwood wrote for the Guardian newspaper back in 2012 about her 1985 book, The Handmaid's Tale. She writes, "Stories about the future always have a what-if premise, and The Handmaid's Tale has several. For instance, if you wanted to seize power in the US, abolish liberal democracy, and set up a dictatorship, how would you go about it? What would be your cover story? It would not resemble any form of communism or socialism. Those would be too unpopular. It might use the name of democracy as an excuse for abolishing liberal democracy. That's not out of the question, though I didn't consider it possible back in 1985. Nations never build apparently radical forms of government on foundations that aren't already there. Thus, China replaced a state bureaucracy with a similar state bureaucracy under a different name. The USSR replaced the dreaded imperial secret police with an even more dreaded secret police, and so forth. The deep foundation of the US, so went my thinking, was not the comparatively recent 18th century Enlightenment structures of the Republic, with their talk of equality and their separation of church and state, but the heavy-handed theocracy of 17th century Puritan New England, with its marked bias against women, which would need only the opportunity of a period of social chaos to reassert itself. Like any theocracy, this one would select a few passages from the Bible to justify its actions, and it would lean heavily towards the Old Testament, not towards the New. Since ruling classes always make sure they get the best and the rarest of desirable goods and services, as is one of the axioms of the novel, that fertility in the industrialized West has come under threat. The rare and desirable would include fertile women, and always on the human wish list one way or another, and reproductive control. Who shall have babies? Who shall claim and raise those babies? Who shall be blamed if anything goes wrong with those babies? These are questions with which human beings have busied themselves for a long time. There would be resistance to such a regime and an underground and even an underground railroad. In retrospect, and in view of 21st century technologies available for spy work and social control, these seem a little too easy. Surely the Gilead command would have moved to eliminate the Quakers, as their 17th century Puritan forebears had done. I made a rule for myself. I would not include anything that human beings had not already done in some other place or time for which the technology did not already exist. I did not wish to be accused of dark, twisted inventions or of misrepresenting the human potential for deplorable behavior. The group-activated hangings, the tearing apart of human beings, the clothing specific to castes and classes, the forced childbearing, and the appropriation of the results, the children stolen by regimes, and placed for upbringing with high-ranking officials, the forbidding of literacy, the denial of property rights, all had precedence. And many were to be found not only in other cultures and religions, but within Western society and within the Christian tradition itself. She says, I enclose Christian in quotation marks, since I believe that much of the church's behavior and doctrine during its 2 millennia long existence as a social and political organization would have been abhorrent to the person after whom it is named. Like the American Revolution and the French Revolution, like the 3 major dictatorships of the 20th century, like the New England Puritan regime before it, Gilead has utopian idealism flowing through its veins, coupled with a high-minded principle, its ever-present shadow, sublegal opportunism, and the propensity of the powerful to indulge in behind-the-scenes sensual delights forbidden to everyone else. But such locked-door escapades must remain hidden, for the regime floats as its raison d'etre the notion that it is improving the conditions of life, both physical and moral, and like all such regimes, it depends on its true believers. That does sound like it could have been written yesterday, doesn't it?
I would like to give a belated welcome to our Facebook viewers. My name's Meredith Andrews, and I'm the service associate today. We welcome to our pulpit David Weissbard, who grew up in this church and has been preaching for 57 years.
Let us take a moment now to share in silent meditation. May it be so. I'm back again. As I noted in the newsletter blurb, this sermon began with the Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs v. Mississippi Department of Health, which threw out the 50-year-old Roe v. Wade decision, which had provided for women's access to safe abortions. The decision in Dobbs ignores the principle of stare decisis, which generally requires the court's honoring of past decisions, something which the judges had pledged to honor during their approval hearings. The sermon was also impelled by the ignorance of Colorado Representative Lauren Boebert, who, speaking on a right-wing radio interview on October 17th, declared, "We are created equal. We are not the same. Women are the lesser vessel, and we need masculinity in our lives to balance that so-called weakness. Just us being more frail and needing that strength in our lives." That stimulus was followed by the strange presentation to me by a young Asian woman visiting during my October service at the Watertown Church. She gave me a 2-volume set of books on the specter of communism is ruining our world, which in turn led me to consider Margaret Atwood's 1985 dystopian novel, The Handmaid's Tale. Dealing with all of these could probably be fruit for 4 sermons, but they are so interrelated by the theme of subjugation of women that I'm going to try to address the four in one sermon sequentially before you experience fanny fatigue. I became concerned with abortion early in my ministry, which preceded Roe. Abortion was illegal back in those days, which is not to say unavailable. It was safely available to women of means and dangerously available to those with limited resources. Our family doctor, Francis Weissbard, who delivered me and my sister, was a founder of Planned Parenthood in Albany. Docky, as we knew her, was a pillar of this church, which is why my family ended up here. She once referred to herself at a church social event as the oldest virgin in the congregation. Docky often had pregnant, unmarried girls living in her home. My mother once indicated that she had had abortions between my birth and my sister's, and I believe that Docky performed them. Abortion was generally legal in the US in the 1800s, but it was made illegal in all the states by 1900, with exceptions for cases of threats to the mother's lives. Making abortions illegal was partly out of concern for the damage done to women by back alley abortionists. Some doctors did supposed D&Cs, which were really abortions. Well, back in 1967, a group of 21 liberal ministers and rabbis in New York City, out of concern for women who did not have access to a supportive doctor, began what was called the Clergy Consultation Service on Abortion. It rapidly expanded to 3,000 clergy in 38 states across the country, who made some 450,000 referrals to licensed decisions before the Roe decision in 1973. I was one of the counselors in the Boston area. The states of Colorado and California legalized abortion in 1967, with New York following in 1970. It did appear likely that change was slowly spreading. And then suddenly, there was the Roe decision, and overnight, the CCS was no longer needed. Now, that on the one hand was a relief. On the other hand, at the time, I experienced and concerned about how it was accomplished. I was worried about the backlash because it was judicially rather than legislatively achieved. And there certainly was backlash. For 49 years, conservatives, largely Roman Catholics and evangelical Protestants, whose religious beliefs viewed abortion as the murder of a human being, sought to get the decision overturned. And finally, in June, 6 conservative Roman Catholics on the Supreme Court, many of whom had been chosen with the goal of overturning Roe in mind, announced that, like the infamous decision in Plessy v. Ferguson, which supported the policy of separate but equal, Roe was also egregiously wrong and on a collision course with the Constitution from the day it was decided. Those who sought to advance the state's interest in fetal life could no longer seek to persuade their elected representatives to adopt policies consistent with those views. The goal of Roe was noble, but in truth, the constitutional basis for it was thin. The decision, though, to overturn it was based on particular religious beliefs, not on medicine, not on science. And supporters of the decision did telegraph that they found contraception and same-sex marriage equally repugnant and ripe for change. For the justices of the court, who had already made it clear that in their minds, Jefferson's concept of separation of church and state was just really a liberal anti-religion fantasy. The field was then wide open. Their ultimate goal is declaring the United States to be a Christian nation with their interpretations of the Bible, setting all the rules. Representative Boebert's view of women is also congruent with the historic teachings of the Roman Catholic Church, evangelical Protestants, and Orthodox Jews. She didn't come up with that cockamamie idea on her own. So God made Adam. Adam was walking around one day and realized that he was lonely. So he asked God for a companion. And God said, I can make a woman for you. She will cook and clean and do everything you ask her to. She will wait on you hand and foot. She will be so beautiful that you won't be able to take your eyes off of her. It is going to cost you an arm and a leg, though. And Adam said, well, what can I get for a rib? Seriously, Eve, having been a second thought in the biblical creation myth, has led many traditional theologians to conclude that females are lesser beings in the eyes of the divine. And then the myth says that Eve seduced Adam into violating the divinity's rule against eating of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so Adam and Eve were driven out of the Garden of Eden. And it says in the 3rd chapter of Genesis, your desire shall be contrary to your husband, but he shall rule over you. The limited rules available even today to women in the Roman Catholic Church certainly suggest a belief in female inferiority. In a letter dated March 31st, 1776, Abigail Adams wrote to her husband, John Adams, urging him and the other members of the Continental Congress not to forget about the women when fighting for America's independence from Great Britain. The future First Lady wrote in part, I long to hear that you have declared an independency. And by the way, in the new code of laws, which I suppose will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation. It, of course, took 150 years for women to be granted the right to vote in the United States. And then the third thing I mentioned as a root of the sermon, there was the coincidental presentation to me of the 2-volume set, How the Specter of Communism is Ruling Our World. I'm trying to figure out what it was that morning in my sermon on hate, the threat to democracy, could possibly have yet led that young woman to believe that I would welcome those books. They were published by the Epoch Times. Has anybody seen the Epoch Times? It's a newspaper, quote unquote, it says, in spite of its claims that using our fact-based and truthful reporting, we seek to focus on what unites us as Americans rather than on what divides us. Effectively, it's Fox News in print, or worse. It is the mouthpiece of the Chinese cult Falun Gong. It is, not surprisingly, one of the former president's favorite news sources. Permit me to take a little bit of time to share with you some of the perspective that is found in the regular pages of the newspaper and in those 2 volumes I was given. Liberalism is not substantially different from progressivism, as it carries the same connotation of high taxes, expansive welfare, big government, the rejection of religion, morality, and tradition, the use of social justice as a political weapon, political correctness, and the militant promotion of feminism, homosexuality, and I've lost a page. That's interesting. Well, somewhere it goes on, the promotion of feminism and homosexuality. And it also attacks the divine to form families, the teaching of the divine to form families, preserving traditional heritage and morality. It goes on. Since the 1960s, a variety of anti-traditional movements, including modern feminism, sexual liberation, and gay rights, have risen to prominence in the West. The institution of the family has been hit the hardest. Under the banners of equality and emancipation, implicitly and explicitly backed by modern laws, school curricula, academic theory, and economic policies, these movements are twisting the traditional bonds between the sexes, corrupting children, and dragging human behavior to previously unimaginable lows. The divine, it says, made men and women different and established different roles for them in the family and in society. They point out in Eastern traditional culture, men are associated with the yang of the yin-yang relationship, and thus are symbolically connected to the sun and the sky. It is man's natural duty to continuously strive to make progress and shoulder the responsibility of taking care of the family. Women belong to the yin principle, which is symbolically connected to the earth, meaning they bear and nurture everything with great virtue. They should be yielding and considerate of others. They have the duty to support their husbands and educate their children. Only when men and women work well in their respective roles can the yin and the yang be harmonized and children grow and develop in a healthy manner. They continue. Attempts to eliminate differences between the sexes run counter to common sense and prevent both men and women from fulfilling their potential. The feminist movement, they say, is another tool communism has used to destroy the family. They say a large group of feminist writers with communist backgrounds paved the way for the subsequent second wave feminist movement, including Susan B. Anthony, Betty Millard, Eleanor Flexner. As early as 1946, Susan B. Anthony applied the Marxist analytical method to draw an analogy between whites oppressing blacks, and males oppressing females. Now, I don't know if you followed that. I note that Susan B. Anthony actually died March 13th, 1906, which made her writing in 1946 really quite remarkable. Advocates of sexual liberation believe that sex should not be limited to the confines of marriage, but unwanted pregnancy presents a natural obstacle to this sort of lifestyle. Contraceptives may fail, so the promoters of unrestricted sex took up the cause of legalizing abortion. At the same time, feminists introduced the slogan, "My body, my rights," to argue that women have the right to choose whether to give birth to or kill their unborn children. By accepting abortion, people have been led to permit the murder of babies and at the same time abandon the traditional understanding that sex is for procreation. And finally, the specter of communism created the mistaken belief that sin is not caused by the degeneration of morality, but by social oppression. It led people to look for a way out through turning their backs on tradition and moving away from the divine. It used the beautiful rhetoric of freedom and liberation to advocate feminism, homosexuality, and sexual perversion. Women have been stripped of their dignity. Men have been robbed of their responsibility. And the sanctity of the family has been trampled upon, turning the children of today into the devil's playthings. I'm intrigued that throughout the two volumes, the word divine always begins with a small d. I have devoted so much time to what I consider these utterly repugnant ideas from the epic times because I believe that these are a fair statement of the beliefs of the majority of the so-called justices of the Supreme Court, and sorry to say, a significant portion of the population of the United States today. A reality that we need to contend with. We ignore these people and their ideas at our own peril. We might like to believe that no one today believes such ridiculous things, but the people who do make themselves heard. Look now at the new House of Representatives and the membership of the committees. It was confronting the reality of the presence of such beliefs that led me to Margaret Atwood's prescient dystopian novel, The Handmaid's Tale. I confess that while I was aware of the essence of the story, I had never actually sat down to read the book, nor had I seen its popular video presentation on Hulu. I have now read the book and viewed 2 episodes of the TV series, which I find to be very faithful to the book. I find it uncanny that Atwood could have written something so relevant to today 37 years ago. The book scares the hell out of me. The story takes place in Gilead, which encompasses what was formerly known as New England. The United States suffered from an excess of environmental chemicals and radiation from a nuclear plant that was located, of course, on the San Andreas Fault. One of the results was a disastrous decline in the American birth rate and many stillbirths. I quote, "It was after the catastrophe when they shot the president and machine gunned the Congress and the army declared a state of emergency. They blamed it on Islamic fanatics at the time. Keep calm," they said on television. "Everything's under control." That was when they suspended the Constitution. They said it would be temporary. There wasn't even any rioting in the streets. People stayed home at night, watching television, looking for some direction. There wasn't even an enemy you could put your finger on. Things continued in that state of suspended animation for weeks, although some things did happen. Newspapers were censored, and some were closed down for security reasons, they said. The roadblocks began to appear and identity passes. Everyone approved of that since it was obvious you couldn't be too careful. They said that new elections would be held, but that it would take some time to prepare for them. The thing to do, they said, was to continue on as usual. The people who took charge were Christians who set out to run a theocracy loosely based on biblical principles. That's the context of the novel. The reality is that the entire society was restructured. Women's jobs outside the home were eliminated. Families were taken apart. There were 3 classes of women. There were the wives of the leaders who wore blue outfits, Marthas, who did the housework, wore green, and the handmaids whose job it was to bear the babies wore red robes, designed much like nuns' habits, but longer. The Marthas and the handmaids were considered to be things, not people. There were also women who did not fall into any of those categories, too old, too sterile, rebellious. They were deemed to be unwomen and were exiled to colonies where life expectancy was brief. Men were divided into guardians who guarded the checkpoints, and those with household duties like chauffeurs. Angels were the soldiers and the leaders. The commanders, were the soldiers, and the leaders were called the commanders. The handmaids were known by the names of the commander to whose household they were assigned. The central character is Offred, which is of Fred. Her friends included of Warren and of Glenn. Offred's commander's wife was Serena Joy, who had been a televangelist who preached that women ought to stay in the home. She wasn't really all that happy when she achieved her wish. The wives were mostly sterile because of the pollution, which is why there was a need for handmaids to birth the babies. Handmaids were subjected to physical examinations to be sure they were ripe for reproduction. They had physicals each month to determine when they were most fertile. When that time came, the commander would gather the household and read to them from the Bible, particularly sections about handmaids. Offred would go to the wife's bedroom and lie on her bed with her head between the wife's thighs and her hands above her head clasped by the wife's hands. Both were fully clothed, except that Offred would have removed her undergarments. The commander would enter the room, also fully clothed, and proceed to do his duty, standing at the foot of the bed, hoping to impregnate Offred. If she did not conceive after a time, it would be deemed to be her fault. It couldn't be that the commander might be sterile. There was nothing erotic or pleasurable about this process. The lives of the handmaids were strictly regulated. Means of committing suicide were generally made unavailable, although some managed to succeed nonetheless. In the book, the commander ends up summoning Offred to his den, where he asks her to play Scrabble with him. Now, being alone with a handmaid was strictly forbidden, and they are not supposed to be able to read, which made the Scrabble game doubly against the rules. Subsequently, the commander then takes Offred to a pleasure palace, which is just another major violation. Serena Joy finds out about that excursion and is furious. So she proposes that Offred should sleep with the chauffeur, who might be more successful in impregnating her than the commander had been. In the end, we are told that Offred may have been helped by the underground to escape to Canada, but we don't know for sure. Now, I would not pretend to have effectively communicated the flavor of the book. I don't have a clue as to how I could have done that better. That's what makes the book so great, the skill of the author, which cannot be successfully condensed. That book has never been out of print since its publication, and it has been translated into a number of languages and turned into an opera, as well as the Hulu series, which is now in its 7th season. I turn to this story because it seems to me to be much like what the United States could become were the Christian nationalists active in our midst today and in our Congress to be successful. Such ventures never turn out just the way the instigators envisioned. The novel depicts a society in which women are truly lesser vessels, dependent upon men for their identities. In a 2017 review of the TV series, Madeline Davies said, "The concept of The Handmaid's Tale is wildly disturbing, but hardly unfathomable as we enter into an era of increasingly draconian law and a far-right leaning federal government that during the brief time that the then administration had been in office, it had shown little regard for the Constitution and human rights in general. In the world of The Handmaid's Tale," she said, "and the world we live in, it takes very little time for a government body to strip you of your freedom, especially when you already belong to a discriminated class like women, people of color, and non-Christians." I highly recommend the reading of The Handmaid's Tale if by some chance you haven't yet. It really does make one stop to think. Now, in researching for the sermon, I stumbled upon 2 concepts on the internet which I had not considered. One is called Female Supremacy United, and the other Female-Led Relationships. They represent the mirror image of the patriarchy. They cite William Golding's comment, "I think women are foolish to pretend that they are equal to men. They are far superior and always have been. Wherever you give a woman, she will make greater. If you give her a house, she will give you a home. If you give her groceries, she will give you a meal. If you give her a smile, she will give you her heart. She multiplies and enlarges what is given to her. So if you give her any crap, be ready to receive a ton of, let's say, excrement." The women who have written for the female-led relationships entry on the internet go way beyond Golding. Biologically, ethically, genetically, and socially speaking, the purpose of men is to provide for, serve, and protect women, to attempt to gain approval, companionship, and favor from women, and to be used by women for sexual or reproductive purposes. Female supremacy embraces the fundamental nature of women and men, but rejects any need for women to placate men and stroke their egos by pretending not to be in charge. Thus, a man's role is to fulfill his natural purpose by submitting himself to female authority, guidance, and domination. A man's role is to show appropriate respect to all women and obedience to the women in his life, appropriate to their place in his life. A man's purpose, they say, is to serve women, perform tasks for them, to be useful, provide for them by getting things done, to enhance the lives of women, to support them, and to prioritize women to any reasonable degree. A man's purpose is to submit to and endure whatever humiliation, discipline, training, physical use, restraint, and conditioning a woman in an appropriate authority over him decides is useful. Oh, useful, necessary, enjoyable, desirable, or practical. Given my immersion in a patriarchal society, I really had to question whether this was satire. The more I read, the more seriously I took it. And there is much more to read. If you are curious, check out female-led relationships on the internet. I can assure you that Karen, the woman who calls me husband, and I have cooperatively worked it out so that my role in our marriage is to address the big issues while she attends to the little ones. Of course, one of the little decisions is to judge which decisions qualify as big. After 32 years of marriage, I'm standing by, waiting for a big issue to emerge. Quite seriously, having been raised in what was in many ways a feminist home, and those who know my family may wonder at that, but the fact is my mother was very skilled at making my father think he was in charge, but that wasn't necessarily so. And then being raised in this church, believing in the worth and dignity of every person, male and female, and aware of the difficulty that we have in letting go of traditional ways of relating. I am therefore deeply concerned about the dangers that the hard-won progress toward gender equality we have achieved face today. While I cherish Theodore Parker's 1853 prophecy in a Unitarian pulpit, echoed by Martin Luther King, that the arc of the moral universe is long, but bends toward justice, I still wrestle with the question with which I lead you. This sermon is about raising a question, not providing simple answers. But I have to ask, are we doomed to go back to the bad old days? What is it that we are prepared to do to prevent the mark of the moral universe from bending away from justice?
Before I introduce the offering, we need to note that with the exception of OWL for grades 8 and 9, Sunday morning programming for children and youth ends at 11:15. If you have children in pre-K through 5th grade, please pick them up from their classrooms at that time. Older kids will be released on their own at 11:15 to reconnect with their grown-ups. Please feel free to leave the service when it's time to pick up your children. An important way we celebrate life each Sunday is by offering an opportunity to practice generosity. Members and friends support our congregation with an annual pledge paid throughout the year. Another way to support the good work of this congregation is by making a generous contribution as we pass the plate, or via one of the options shown on this next slide. If you are joining us virtually, you can click on the tiny URL link in the chat window to contribute, or you can send a text to the number shown on the screen. The examples on the slide show how to label your text to indicate the amount and the purpose of your gift. We must now say goodbye to our Facebook friends. Consider joining us on Zoom next time or visit us in person at 405 Washington Avenue, Albany. You can find more information at albanyuu.org.
our offering today is We Are Dancing, Sarah's Circle, number 1212. And if you have your hymnal, I want you to open it. You'll notice something about it. When I first looked at it, and I talked to Dave about it, I noticed that the tune is Jacob's Ladder. And usually, you won't really see a lot of African-American spirituals adapted. It is just not a practice that you see in a lot of hymnals. So it made me alert. And I did a lot of research, and I really couldn't find why she chose this particular hymn tune. Carol Etzler is a composer who does a lot of UU work. And the words that she chose are feminist words to this song, Jacob's Ladder. Jacob's Ladder is about freedom and hope, climbing, while Sarah's Circle is about freedom and hope and moving forward in a circle. And I always think about how I look at that chalice, and I think about every single Sunday how that chalice looks just a little bit bigger to me as we extend that circle and we welcome more and more people and we bring forward justice. So today we are going to sing 212. What we're going to do, though, is instead of singing sisters and brothers, we're going to be singing family, neighbors, and all as we welcome family and neighbors. Let us sing. We Are Dancing, Sarah's Circle.
Good morning. My name is Sandy Stone, and I am on duty today as Pastoral Care Associate. Also on duty is Donna Meixner, standing in the back. This is the time set aside in our service for sharing significant personal milestones in our lives. There are several ways to share a joy or sorrow. On Zoom, you can click on the raise hand symbol. The technician will call on you to unmute and share your joy or sorrow. Those in community hall will be able to come forward, select a stone to place in the bowl on the table. If you wish, you can share your joy or sorrow at the microphone. Please consider sharing your joy or sorrow after the service with one of our pastoral care associates. We'll begin reading items that were submitted this past week. That will be followed by the spoken joys and sorrows on Zoom, and finishing with any joys and sorrows to be shared from Community Hall.
We have no pre-submitted joys and sorrows, and so far we have no raised hands on Zoom.
All righty then. Those wishing to move a stone are now invited to come forward. If you wish to speak your joy or sorrow, you can wait with the usher at the microphone. You may come forward now.
Okay, Tanya Hotalin here. I've been cleaning out, and I happen to have a whole bunch of highlighters. So if anybody needs highlighters, you can come to me. I have 3 of these marvelous metal rulers, and my husband had been substitute teaching up until the last 2 years that he passed. And I have a whole bunch of these erasers for a pencil. So if you need any of those things, oh, and the other thing is I have a pair of flip-top sunglasses that have never been worn. So if you're interested in any of those things, come see me. And also this Tuesday, I'm celebrating my birthday. So.
Oh.
Morning, I'm John Morse. Everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, a couple of concerns. One was on a bus last night, there was a driver, a passenger swearing and shouting with the driver, not at the driver, because apparently they're friends, and there was a lot of profanity on the bus last night from the passenger, and that was very upsetting to hear. And I took video of the incident, and I can play it back for whoever wants to see it. If I were to speak the way that passenger did, I would expect to be escorted from this building and possibly arrested for disorderly conduct. And just so for bus transit, it's no wonder that so few people care for it. I wouldn't ride it myself, except that it's the best way for me to get to my partner's home in Niskayuna, since he won't move to Delmar. And the other concern was from the front page of this Albany Times Union about restraints on persons who have autism. I don't know how many of you saw that already. And that affects me because I went to a center for retarded children in the late 60s, and the staff punished me and others by locking us in lockers or storage rooms.
Good morning. I'm Mary Applegate. The first thing I wanted to remember is that a close friend of mine called me yesterday to let me know that her father had died the day before yesterday of COVID. So, I mean, a personal sorrow and a reminder that it's not gone yet. But the other thing, I wanted to thank Reverend Weissbard for giving this sermon. We did not plan it ahead of time, but the week after NEC, through our partnership with Upper Hudson Planned Parenthood, we're going to be having a program on Friday evening, the 10th, about the current state of abortion rights in this country and what we're doing to help assure access. We're also going to be seeing a great documentary. Stay tuned for further further info, but I hope you'll all be able to come. And thank you.
Hi, I'm Laura Rose, and this is A Joy of a Sorrow. As a reminder and call to attention, this week is the International Holocaust Remembrance Day. It was Friday. This is a day to commemorate the victims of the Holocaust, which resulted in the murder of 1/3 of the Jewish people, along with the countless members of other minorities between 1933 and 1945 by Nazi Germany. And it's my daughter actually is right now at the Holocaust Museum in New York City as her tribute to her heritage.
Hello, I'm Molly Daniels, and I just wanted to share some timely information based on this sermon. So Thursday of this week, my son shared, he's 17, that he had chosen for his civics class, he needed to choose an amendment that had not yet been passed. And so he chose the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment. And I was a little shocked and happy. And he was telling me all of this information about how 50 years have gone by and this still hasn't been passed. And I said, well, that's really interesting. I have some things to show you. I was at a march at 11 years old with my mother in Washington, D.C. And I have my button that says ERA now. And, I have very fond memories of being there, being present with my mother, fighting for those rights. And I'm just saddened that it has still been 50 years and we're in the same place. So thank you.
So good morning, I'm Ann Savage. I wanted to share with all of you that my mother, who was on a long journey with Alzheimer's, passed away a week ago, which is why I was not ushering last Sunday, as it came to our attention that early that morning. So we should all be so lucky to pass away peacefully in our sleep at the end of our lives. And I'm grateful that that is what came to pass for her after that long journey.
My name is Peggy Sherman, and my sorrow is that police violence against Black people continues.
We have one raised hand on Zoom. Nancy Wagner, if you could unmute and share.
Hello, this is Nancy Wagner. Barb, can you please put my picture up? Anyway, a week and a half ago, I fell on the ice and broke my hand. And it was, of course, my right hand. And I'm not allowed to drive for a month at least. And thanks to my P's and Q's friends and other friends for giving me rides. I need rides home from choir. Thank you.
Those are the only raised hands we have on Zoom at this time.
Thank you. I have one more. I'm not sure whether it's a joy or a sorrow. My 97-year-old brother-in-law, who lives in North Carolina, will be undergoing a heart valve replacement tomorrow. We'll see whether this is a joy or a sorrow. As I select one more stone on behalf of those joys and sorrows that are left unspoken, let us hold all that we've heard and felt in our hearts.
We'd like to get to know guests and visitors to our service. If you'd like to tell us who you are and where you're from, those here in the community hall should stand or raise your hand. The usher will bring you a microphone so that everyone can hear you. Those joining us on Zoom can click on the raise hand symbol. Our technician will invite you to unmute and introduce yourself. You can also click on the visitor link you'll find now in the chat window. One today.
We have no raised hands on Zoom.
Thank you and welcome to all who have joined us today. If you'd like to learn more about our congregation or Unitarian Universalism, you can stop by the lobby and speak with our host at the welcome table. On Zoom, you can find someone with welcome before their name. You can reach out to that person in the chat window. There will also be opportunities to socialize and welcome newcomers at the service, after the service, both for those on Zoom and those here in Community Hall. And I have one announcement for today. I know this is always looked forward to. Save the date. The 18th annual wine and cheese event will be held on Saturday, April 1st at 7 p.m. No fooling, it's happening. And it will feature wines and cheeses from Spain. Think you know all the Spanish varieties? Well, we'll have some you may not know, but are accessible right here in the Capital Region shops. We're not fooling around. Your WineX planning team is already working hard diligently, going through the arduous process of choosing the wines and soon the cheeses, so it can give you the best experience. So save the date, more to come.
For the benediction, I did think that I indicated when I sent in the order of service refinements that I would be happy to join for some discussion of the sermon. That it doesn't say it there, but do we do that in here? We do. So any who would like to share their 2 cents worth, we really are, we will welcome that. Now may the truths that make us free, the hope that never dies, and the love that casts out fear lead us and those we love and those whom nobody loves forward together until the day spring breaks and the shadows flee away.
For our closing hymn, we're singing number 133, One World. The words by Vincent B. Silliman. I have a little fun fact about Mr. Silliman. He helped create and guide and shape the hymnals that we have in front of us today. The very first hymnal, I'm about to lie to you because I can't remember the name of it. It is Hymns for Celebration of Life. It was the first UU hymnal that was published in 1964. It was used for 30 years before the gray hymnal you have in front of you came to fruition. And what's really interesting is that his legacy has continued on. Through the UU composers, there's a competition called the Vincent B. Sullivan Hymn Competition. And composers can bring forward their music, and there's some, there are certain things like you have to be able to sing it in unison, it can have harmony, things like that, that gets submitted every year. And the last year was 2021. So a lot of the hymns that you see now in that gray hymnal and also in the teal hymnal came from that competition. So Vincent B. Sullivan, if you get a chance to read up on him, he's just a very interesting man and a very interesting composer. He also did a lot of children's work. So I'm going to go dig around that, considering that we're going to be starting some youth music ministry stuff. So today, it's a delight to learn more about him and also sing this song, One World by Vincent B. Sullivan.
As Meredith extinguishes the chalice, can we join in the words on the screen? I hope on the screen, or at least on the order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Those on Zoom are encouraged to join a breakout room for conversation and fellowship. You can click accept the breakout room assignment when it appears on your screen. Those in Community Hall are invited to attend coffee hour. We especially encourage guests and visitors to join us for coffee and refreshments. Anyone on Zoom or in Community Hall is welcome to attend a congregational response to discuss this service topic. You can stay in the same Zoom meeting or right here in Community Hall and the discussion will begin in a few minutes. Those wishing to socialize with others are asked to exit Community Hall so that the congregational response can start promptly. We're glad you joined us today. This concludes our service.
David, how are you? Good. Ladies, leaving yet? I'm not surprised. So that's like,
yeah, we'll go down the steps.
Thanks for staying with me. What? Don't have any. Right, Emma? Yeah. Less than $20 a dozen. How are they doing?